Just last year, I made multiple six figures in sales on Etsy. During my whole Etsy journey, I've learned and witnessed quite a few horror stories. So in this video, I'll go over 7 fundamentals that we all need to know to not get our shop suspended on Etsy. Let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that we gotta know when we're selling on Etsy is their handmade policy. So we do print on demand. Print on demand is what we talk about on this channel, but there are 3 things that we can basically sell on Etsy. So if we just head on Etsy here and look at their policy, Etsy also always says this line: handmade items, vintage items, or craft supplies. It has to have a human element to it. So last year, I saw that there was an influx of people just talking about Etsy dropshipping. In that case, that meant people just taking stuff from, for instance, Alibaba or like CJ dropshipping, putting that stuff up for sale on Etsy, and then just selling them as is, which is not allowed. We always got to be mindful of the policies and not build a business that will eventually for sure be terminated. Since we're doing POD, handmade aspect in this is that we actually have a hand in the process somewhere, either in crafting the items or creating the design. If we look here, for instance, what handmade is, these are the 3 criteria that we have to meet. If we sell handmade items, we basically have to physically make or create the original designs for the items. This is what I talk about on my channel. I always create my designs with inspirations from other listings, and I use elements finding Creative Fabrica and, for instance, on Canva, and just combine them to make something new. Basically, I create my original designs. There are people that just, for instance, you can't take stuff off of Creative Fabrica. Like hypothetically, you can take stuff off Creative Fabrica and just put them on Etsy. However, that is actually against their handmade policy. If we have no hand at all in creating our own designs, then we're actually breaching this policy. Some kind of element has to be added onto a already made graphic in order to be compliant with handmade item policy. Another thing that's super important to know that can actually like be a small, it can feel like a small mistake, but it's really important to have this set in your listing. And that is that we need to include each person involved in making the item. Otherwise, for instance, we use the production partners, which they state here. We have to disclose those in the relevant listings. If we don't, then again, we're breaching the handmade items policy. And how I basically always understand this is that we always have to make sure that we have our specific print providers that we use on, for instance, Printify, checked and added onto Etsy. So let's see, if we just go into this shop here and we create the item, I always use the old version because that's the one that I know the best. Here, this part is the most important part here. So about this listing, the item is made by another company or person. It's a finished product and made to order. The most important thing is that we have to disclose down here that we are actually using a production partner. This is really, really important. If we have missed this, then our listings can eventually be suspended and can actually get our stores suspended. So I'd highly advise to make sure that this is correct. For instance, if we use Monster Digital, the only thing that we would do is just search for Monster Digital, go to their homepage, and then just scroll down to the bottom. And then we can see here they're located in Miami. And then we would just basically add this information right here. It's just important to note that we have to disclose this in our listings in order to be compliant with Etsy's policies. Otherwise, we can actually get our stores suspended. The last thing that we have to do to be compliant with the handmade items, with the handmade policy, is our own photographs. So we can talk a lot about mockups here, but the main thing that I've learned when doing Etsy, our listing have to reflect what the customer actually gets. This part right here. Different handmade techniques produce different results, and it's important that your images accurately reflect the product that a buyer will receive. Mockups may be used for digital items because they correctly depict the item. Items made with production partners. If an item is created with production assistance, the listing's photo should be of the finished product or an image supplied by the production partner that accurately depicts the item the buyer will be receiving. Sellers are responsible for ensuring that these images properly represent their finished items. This is the most important part here. So using mockups on Etsy is one of the main variables to actually get sales. Some of the mockups that are provided, for instance, by Printify or any production partner are not maybe the best ones. So using mockups that you find on Etsy, they always have to reflect like the item itself. There are lots of mockup stores that are selling, like for instance, Gildan 18,000 sweatshirts. And one of the colors that they actually have on sale in their mockup store is so heavily edited that it doesn't even like look like the sweater at all anymore. And that's my takeaway from all of this. We always have to ensure that the mockup reflects the item that the customer actually is getting. That's our responsibility as sellers. So just making sure that the photographs accurately reflect the items that we are selling is highly, highly important to also be compliant with the Etsy handmade policy. I want to make another note here and say that reselling is not allowed in the handmade category on Etsy. So reselling is basically not allowed. And what that basically means is that if me, the seller, weren't involved in designing or making the item, then it's not handmade. So for instance, if we use like drop shipping site, I haven't used that myself, like Alibaba or C3 dropshipping, put that stuff that we haven't had any hand in designing or making, put that up on Etsy, then we're in breach of the handmade policy, will soon enough basically be terminated. When doing POD overall, which we are talking most about on this channel, the most important thing is to always have this stuff listed, that the production partner, always making sure that we, when we add them, we always toggle them on. When we list our stuff, we always toggle that they're actually being used within the listing. And the second thing to think about when it comes to not losing our shops on Etsy is that the customer is always right. This honestly, in my opinion, has always sucked to hear, but Etsy can really like push us to have to refund the customer if we have someone that is really, really hard to talk with or like have any type of conversation with. If they submit a help request and then 48 hours after that help request, it hasn't been resolved, then they can open a case against your shop, and those kind of count against your shop. So I've really tried my best to not have cases basically built against me on my shop. So I've had a few that I just couldn't even see coming. But in all those instances where I've had the cases, I've always just taken the L and just refunded the customer, because it's just not worth risking the whole shop for one Karen, basically. Even though it sucks, and even though you're probably right about like from where you're standing and the customer is just obnoxious and hard to deal with, it's always been my rule at least to just refund the customer, to not lose risking the whole shop. And in all the honesty, there's been just too many horror stories on YouTube that I've seen of big shops that just lost it all for just one too many issues with the store. So always just keeping everything, try to minimize the involvement from Etsy as much as possible, and we will probably like do fine. But the more Etsy is involved, there's a bigger, since it's mostly algorithms and it's really hard to actually get a hold of a person, the best way is always to just try to solve everything yourself and just take the L to not lose the whole thing. That's been my approach, at least for Etsy, and has worked for me this long. Another really important thing is that we always have to ship our orders on time. This might seem kind of obvious, but during Q4 and when times are actually kind of stressed, it's really easy to just lose sight of like an order or two. If we're super busy with orders and just people messaging us, it's really easy to just forget that there's some orders that might need to go out on a specific day. However, if we have too many overdue orders, what Etsy will do is that they'll send out an email, and then they'll basically say that you will be lowered in search. So your rank will drop until like orders have actually been pushed through. And this can really damage your rank and sales overall, basically, because if we aren't seen on the first page, then we will miss out on the majority of the sales. If all we need to do was to update the ship by date, which I'll get into in a moment, then we have possibly missed on thousands and thousands of sales just because we were held up by the algorithm. Another thing to mention is that you can lose your star seller badge if you have too many overdue orders, but I'm not too sure about how much the star seller badge actually affects your rank in search. When it comes to overdue orders, my thing is always to just update the ship by date with either 5 or 7 days, as that's more than enough that the production partner usually needs to ship the order. However, the important part is that you can only update the ship by date one time. You can't do it twice. If you do it by 1 day and it's not shipped within 1 day, then you will definitely have one overdue order that you can't fix. So I'd highly recommend to just update it with some buffer to make sure that you don't have any overdue orders. I usually update them with either 5 or 7 days just to be on the safe side. Another thing that's super important that I think everyone knows, reviews are everything, basically everything. On an individual listing, they do matter a lot, but basically the main thing that matters the most is a shop's overall listings. I've seen shops that have faltered a bit and done some mistakes, and I've just watched them as I've grown my shop, and I've actually seen them like losing almost all of their momentum because they lose their shop ranking because they have too many bad reviews, and that kind of seems at least to be negating them in search. In the beginning, those reviews are basically everything. What I did was that I always went above and beyond for every single customer just to make sure I could build up that social proof. That social proof is really everything. If someone basically gives you a bad review, always good to just reach out to them, see what's wrong, fix the issue, and then hopefully get a review fix from their side. That's never guaranteed from their side, but it's always good to just check and see if that's something that they're willing to do. And a really important note to orders as well. If you ever notice that there's a really problematic person that you're talking to, then it will eventually probably lead to a refund. Then I would highly recommend you just cancel the order, because that actually gives them 48 hours to make a review. After that, they can actually make a review. So canceling is always the best way to approach not getting negative reviews. Once you know that this will probably lead to a refund, then it's just, in my opinion, just better to just cancel it, hopefully negate the review. All right, so just a quick stop. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, please hit the like button and subscribe, as that helps my small little channel a lot, and I'll make sure to give you more content like this in the future. All right, another really important thing that I can't emphasize enough is that it's really important to know about copyrights and trademarks. And the first thing when it comes to copyrights that I think is just the best way to think about trademarks is that as long as you actually make your own designs inspired by other listings, then you actually create the copyright for yourself, for your own design, as soon as you make it. As soon as you actually make the design, you hold the copyright to it. And this goes for everyone else. So as long as we make our own designs, we're safe from any type of like copyright infringement, since we have actually made our designs. That's been my thesis, my time doing Etsy, and that thinking has really served me very well. The other thing that's important to know is about trademarks, because when we browse Etsy, we can just see so many different type of sayings and stuff like that. But it's really important to know that some types of sentences can actually be trademarked and be someone else's property. If you, for instance, go on to Etsy, let's see here, let's search for one item that I've talked a lot about on my channel, which is sweatshirts. We'll go to the trusty old sweatshirts, and just gotta filter this so that I see the correct stuff. Okay, let's see here if we can find some trademarked stuff that we can sell. So this one, for instance, is kind of obvious. So we haven't created Homer, so obviously we can't use Homer in our designs. Since someone else has created Homer, then that means that in order for us to be able to use anything related to The Simpsons, we actually have to have a license for it, and that costs, and usually also means, probably, I don't know this, but it probably also means that you also have to give them a portion of every sale that you make. The best way just to stay away from anything that you know is trademarked, like Homer Simpson, for instance. So when it comes to trademarked stuff, let's see here if we can find any trademarked stuff. Let's take this one, for instance. So this one says New York University. This might seem like something you actually can put on a sweatshirt. However, it's really important to always check for trademarks with whatever type of saying you do, even if it seems obvious, even if it's, for instance, like a city or something like that, because anything, literally anything can be trademarked, and even like the stupidest things can be trademarked. In this instance, New York University is trademarked. When there are trademarks, they are specifically trademarked for specific classes. Class 25 is always for clothing. So, and also when you trademark stuff, you have to trademark stuff in specific countries. And this is only applied to the US, since what it says here. I always use Flying Research for this, as it's the easiest way to actually do trademark research these days. It just takes the database from USPTO.gov and easily just filters out stuff, so we can just see stuff that's more relevant to our search. USPTO.gov also has a search engine, but it's just so much of a hassle to actually look through that whole thing. So I'd really recommend using Flying Research. There's a link in the description if you want to use it. You only need to make an account, and it doesn't cost anything. You can just use the trademark search for free. But if we look at the specific trademark here, we can see here, okay, we can actually, usually we can just double check the trademark here, but there's something fishy going on with the USPTO database today. But there is a trademark for New York University, and within the description of the trademark, it says that it's actually for the words themselves, just the standard characters. We can't actually say New York University within our listings. I'd highly recommend you just stay far away from any trademarks to not risk your whole Etsy shop. It usually ends up with not being able to get it back. It's never good to like risk the whole thing just for one small item. And the last thing that I think is really important to know, and that's actually suspension errors. So when I started, I actually got suspended almost immediately. And at that time, I actually just called them and then I was able to get it back. I'm not sure if you can do that today, but that's what I did. I also know that you can send an email, however, it usually takes longer time for them to respond. Sadly, there is something with their whole Etsy system thing that seems to trigger their security systems, so that when you open a shop, it can seem like you're a bot or something like that. There is today even a fee now for starting an Etsy shop. So if you want to start an Etsy shop today, you actually have to pay for a fee. I think they implemented this to negate any type of bots and any type of scamming companies and stuff like that. But even with that, I hear all the time of people's new shops getting suspended. If your shop got suspended, just contact them, because there's something within their systems that is bad. Just try to do your best to contact them, and you will most likely have it back, since you haven't done anything wrong. If you just open it, list it, your first thing, and then it's off. Highly recommend to do that. And the easiest way to just formulate that is just to request an appeal when you actually are talking to them. So just have that kind of a sentence within your email or within your chat if you use the chat function within Etsy. So Etsy is always just all about the algorithm. So it's just important to always comply with the handmade policy and just with anything else, but by not, for instance, doing trademarks, because the algorithm is actually the thing that's going to suspend you, not a person. I think I saw that they had some layoffs, which basically means that it will be probably even harder to get a hold of someone. Being very diligent about making sure they're always compliant with their policies, that everything is correctly set up within the listing level, and not doing any trademarks or stuff or infringing on other people's copyright. That's usually just the easiest way to just go about this whole thing. And on tidbit to that, when I started, I listed sometimes 50 listings a day. There was actually one day where I listed even more than that. I think I listed between 60 and 70 listings in one day. And that actually got my store suspended. So I highly advise to not list more listings than 50 in one day. I got my store back after that. There was something that triggered the Etsy algorithm. But yeah, just sticking to a maximum of 50 listings a day after that has always worked well for me, if you want to do the crazy listing spree that I did. All right, so we just went through how to not get our store suspended on Etsy. If there's anything that you'd like me to cover next, just drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to help out. I'll see you in the next one.